My Life Now is a half-hour podcast show which regularly features reviews of new releases and all-time classics of both traditionally published and self-published books.
Tune in for special guest interviews and, of course, helpful tips to not only write your next book, but also to help market it.
My Life Now is most often referred to as a great way for authors to get quality exposure and avid readers to discover their next read.
Without further delay, here's another stimulating episode of My Life Now.
Welcome back to another episode of My Life Now. Once again, my name is Dallas here. I have another amazing author joining us all the way from Mexico, Jonathan Brown. Jonathan, pleasure to have you here today. How you doing?
Dallas, thanks. It's a great day. It's mid-afternoon here in Mexico, and we're going to get some showers this afternoon. It's about 75 degrees, so how can you beat that?
You can't beat it. You can't. Not in this heat. I got Texas heat here today, about 95 degrees, so that sounds wonderful where you're at. I want to have our audience stay tuned for the next couple minutes. We're going to take the time and get to know you a little bit better. But right after that, we're going to be talking about your book titled, Of Course It's True. And then you have in brackets, except for a couple of lies. So that's is a very intriguing title of what is going on. So just take the next couple of minutes, Jonathan. Tell us about yourself, your family, your business, what brought you to Mexico, and then we'll go into the book from there.
Okay, I was born in Berkeley, and I'm a baby boomer. I'm the first-year baby boomer. And I was named after a guy named Jonathan Archer, who would be an uncle 5 times back or something like that. And he decided in 1849 to come to California. And he came to California around the Horn, actually stopped in Rio de Janeiro and some other places, got to California in 1850, and then died very quickly after that. The family lore was that he was hunting for gold because that was right in the middle of the gold rush. I don't believe that's true with the research that I did. But so I grew up, my father was in the oil business, so we moved to Bakersfield when I was about 10 or 11, which was a country town, and then moved to the Los Angeles area. And then I went to university in Stockton at the University of the Pacific, which is the oldest university in California, and then did graduate work at Catholic Harvard, and finished a doctorate and George Washington, and then finished a doctorate in public administration with a specialization in finance and taxation at USC. My primary career was in the intersection between higher education and politics. So I worked in the White House, I worked in the Senate, I worked in the US House of Representatives. I then worked in the California legislature. And then in 1975, opened an office to lobby for all the private colleges in California, and did that until 2011. I became the president of the organization in 1991. So it's an odd career. I served on a bunch of boards, including helping to found an insurance company that deals with nonprofits. Also with a casualty company called California Casualty. Did a lot of charitable service. When I closed my office in 2011, I opened a consulting firm called Buffalo Consulting, with a tagline of "When you need more than a nickel's worth of good advice." If you remember Buffalo Nickel, don't take a Buffalo Nickel. And so spent the last 10 or 15 years working with colleges and universities, and with the president of Mexico, and with some others, some governors, trying to make things work better, and then merging colleges and universities. So it's been an odd trip.
Wow. Sounds like you have a lot of great accomplishments over the highlight of your career. So thank you for sharing those things. And going right into the book from there, what an intriguing title. What led you to write this book, and what caused you to choose this title?
Well, my daughter, in 2019, my daughter said, "Dad, you ought to write down some of your stories because you're a pretty good storyteller." And so I started, she gave me something called Storyworth, which is a program that will write a book for you. They give you a bunch of prompts, you fill them out, they produce a book for you. Wow. And I got to a question maybe 2 weeks into the process that said, what was your room like when you were a child? And the answer was messy. Okay. And that's all I had to say. And I said, I think I can write a better book. So I started to compile, and I was really interested in Jonathan Archer, the person I was named after. So I worked on that. I did a lot of research on why he came. I've got some of his original letters that he sent back to his family. And then I said, what am I really interested in? And it came down to three things. It came down to family, life, and values. So I divided the book up into 3 sections, or staves, like musical staves. That's a title that Dickens used in A Christmas Carol. And the first is on family, and it talks a lot about my family and members of my family, grandparents, parents, things like that, siblings. And then and my academic formation. And then I wrote a bunch of chapters on my life, my attraction to technology. I'm a technology junkie, on a whole bunch of stuff. I flew for about 20 years. I flew more than 100,000 miles a year. So I talked a lot about travel. And that was interesting. And then I finally said, okay, what are the things that drove my life? And it comes down to a couple of basic principles. I believe that markets work better than government most of the time. I believe that values are really important, but you got to be ready to change them when things change. I believe that the founding principles of the country were pretty damn smart, and they are. So I wrote chapters about those. I did a little bit on the economics of all those things. And then the last chapter I wrote was a question that you get in political life about whether the glass is half full or half empty.
Right.
And when I taught economics, one of the things that I started that course with was a different question, which is, it isn't whether the glass is half full or half empty, it's refillable. And that a refillable, having the ability to do things well and to change things over a lifetime, is very important. Now, how did I come up with the idea of the title? 2 things got me. One is that as I talked to family members about Jonathan Archer, everybody had a little different story about Jonathan Archer, and they weren't lying, but they just had different interpretations. And so I said, well, so everybody's stories are a little bit different. And so you got to admit that. And it was a catchy title. And the cover of the book, which looks like this, has an odd picture out of San Miguel. And I think part of it is I wanted the book to be fun too. Right. So it's a fun book to read. So why they call it, of course, it's true, except for a couple of lies, because I thought it would be a catchy title, and I thought it.
And I think it is. I think it has definitely done that.
What I was trying to achieve.
Yeah, you've said it already that this book kind of keeps an optimistic tone throughout it. Tell us more about that. Why be so optimistic, and how do we see these different things, that pursuit of happiness within the book?
Well, so the interesting thing, when the founders wrote about the pursuit of happiness, they weren't saying everybody's going to get what they want. They said, let's think about giving people the greatest opportunity if they put the effort in. So that got me to think. I did a lot of work in my doctoral work about the founders. In about 1880, Woodrow Wilson and a couple of other major political figures of the time said the founders had it all wrong. And so started to say you can get experts to do everything for us, and they'll make better decisions. That's one of the 5 principles in the book. And I think that's absolutely wrong. And we saw it in COVID. We saw it in a whole bunch of other things where experts basically said, we know what's going on. And you had a bunch of people who said, we see that it's not going on correctly. And so I think part of the reason that I keep thinking optimistically is that there's a principle called subsidiarity, which says that we ought to govern ourselves closest to the source of the activity. Right. And the more that we send stuff east, in my case at least, the more we send stuff east, the less possible it is for people to make right decisions. And so that guided me a lot. And so that was one of the other principles. I thought about how people could make their lives better. And ultimately, I think our system is based on a very simple idea. It's to give people the opportunity to do things that they want to do from their own perspective.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. We have to put in the effort as well. That's such
Right.
a great point. We can't just sit on the shovel, leaning over on it and expect something to happen. We have to put the effort in. I think that's such a great point. I want to talk about the title again, as we spoke on that already. Of course, it's true, except a couple of lies. What are some of those lies? Are they just white lies? Are they exposed things? Like, what's going on here? What are some of those lies?
Well, I think they're lies and they're big lies. Let's go to COVID for a minute. In the middle of COVID, 3 very distinguished epidemiologists wrote something called the Great Barrington Statement. And what it said was that here's what we understand about what's going on. And we were all living through something that we didn't know about. We didn't understand it. We sort of had some idea of where it came from. The experts all said it didn't come from Wuhan. It did. And now they've all capitulated on that. And then they said, we're going to lock kids up, for example. We're not going to let them go to school for 2 years. And parents said, those kids are being damaged by that. And the experts said, no, we know what we're doing. And they didn't. Yeah. And you can take multiple examples of that. You can start with Vietnam, for example, where Robert McNamara and his experts said, here's the way we're going to win the war in Vietnam. And so they produced a bunch of numbers to prove what they said they were going to do, and they were wrong. They were consistently wrong. There's a great story about Lyndon Johnson going to Sam Rayburn, who was then Speaker of the House. And Johnson was a young vice president then, a very powerful, very smart politician. He goes to Mr. Sam, as he was called, and Sam said, and Johnson says, we got all these guys who are going to solve all these problems of the world. And Johnson said, I think they are probably pretty smart, but I wish one of them had been elected a sheriff. Right. So had any practical experience. So that's a guiding principle of the way I think about the world.
Yeah. Discover the secrets of a fulfilling retirement with Sean Maloney's The Priority of Retirement. How to align your financial future using the wisdom of the ages. Learn to identify your retirement why, reduce risks, and navigate the 3 phases of retirement. Unlock the Retire Happy framework and embrace generosity for lasting happiness. Plan wisely for a rewarding future. Buy your copy on Amazon or listen to the podcast, The Priority of Retirement. Discover Golden Enigma, where faith meets fashion. Embrace your spirituality with our high-quality, stylish clothing and accessories. Designed to make you feel confident and beautiful as part of the body of Christ. From elegant jewelry to cozy hoodies, our divine designs celebrate your unique faith journey. Express your beliefs beautifully and authentically. Visit us now at goldenenigma.com and elevate your wardrobe with a touch of heaven.
Something you write is that the power of memoirs are so important, so powerful, because people remember things differently. Tell me more about that idea and why these are so important to you, these different stories.
Well, I started out with a much longer list of stories. For example, I started a chapter. Black Lives Matter was going on very heavily then, and so I went back and looked at Plessy versus Ferguson, which is a determining case in 1896 that created this horrible principle called separate versus equal, separate but equal. And I read a lot about that, and essentially said the people, including Homer Plessy, the guy who was the plaintiff, and a whole bunch of other civil rights leaders had it right, that the way that we ought to be able to think about reconciling the races was to have us figure out our common interests rather than dividing us. And at that time, we were doing a whole bunch of separatist things and stuff like that. That isn't the principle that the country was founded on. But we had a bunch of experts who said, no, we've got to do that. And so I think we had to think carefully about sort of the next place that people were going. And I kept coming to that. I ended up not putting the Plessy chapter in the book because I couldn't get it to where I wanted it to be. And I didn't want to publish an 800-page book.
Right.
So, the process of writing is a really interesting process. I set up a blog. I now have a Substack. And it's a way for me to interact with ideas. Ideas are very important to me. And I got a lot of good feedback. I went to a bunch of experts in the areas that I was writing in, and that were friends. And I said, okay, what do you think of this? And so writing, for me at least, was a very interactive process. You've really got to put the work in, and you've got to spend the time to do it. I blocked out a couple hours every day to either do research or writing. So it's a solitary process, but then the best way to get a book done is to shop the parts of the book and say, what do you think? I'll tell you a funny story. As I have gotten people reading it, one of the guys who read it was a vice chair of a university where I was the chair of the board for 7 years. And he's an MD and a very liberal Democrat, a very good friend. And so I wrote to John when I found he had bought it, and I said, John, can you do two things for me? One, can you write a review, because that helps build sales? Right. And two, can you tell me the first page that I annoyed you? Okay. And he must have been on the internet at the time, because he wrote back immediately and he said, I don't like the cover. Okay. And I think part of this was a chance for me to say, here's what I think. And I think the other side of the book, I hope, is for other people to say, here's what we think. Right. So I see it as an interactive process.
Yeah, and I love this idea of Substack as well. It's a huge market for putting those thoughts out there, those ideas, and sounds like that's a place for you. Absolutely.
It's a remarkable resource, and it's as news media kept either going far right or far left. Substack, I think Barry Weiss has done a brilliant job of corralling certainly a bunch of writers more famous than I, but corralling a bunch of writers who have disparate opinions and right. Keeping, because I think the substance of any republic, which is what we are, is dialogue, and we don't have that right now.
Yeah. Out of all the things that you've experienced and learned and important moments that you've been a part of, what have been the biggest lessons? Because you said values is a big part of your book. What are just a couple of those values that you could give to us today?
Well, interesting thing. When I first became a lobbyist, when I opened my office in 1975, there was an old guy who represented the independent petroleum producers named Joe Shell. And Joe, I don't think, ever had an intellectual theory in his life. And I said, what do I do for a living now that I'm a lobbyist? And he looks at me and he goes, John, footprints in the snow. And I go, huh? And he says, when you figure that out, you're going to be a pretty good lobbyist. And the idea was two things. One is that you don't want to always take credit. You want to get things done. Okay. And the second thing, which he said separately, was your word is your bond. And he says, you may make political contributions. I ended up not, because I was working for nonprofits, but ultimately your word is your bond. So if you say something and agree to it, it's a deal and it's inviolate. That isn't as true as it once was, and it's unfortunate, because I think when you build trust in a political system, you can get diverse opinions to come up with good ideas.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anything else you would want us to take away from your time here today or this book?
I think anyone who reads it will enjoy it. I think some of the stuff, my wife, when she read The Last Stave, which is about values, said this looks a little bit like your dissertation because you took out all the photographs that you put in and put in footnotes. And I'm guilty, sorry. But that was to give people a chance to figure out that I had done a lot of thought on this.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is that a good memoir, and I had a discussion with my publisher about this, and we finally came out the right way, that I think part of this is pictures. So the book has a lot of pictures in it. And for example, it has, when Jonathan Archer came to California, he booked a ship's passage on a thing called the South Carolina on a boat. Cost him $250 to travel around the Horn. And I've got a picture of that certificate. And then I've got a bunch of others. Interesting thing in the family stuff, Jonathan Archer was only in California for about 6 months, but his younger brother, Oliver Hazard Perry Archer, was a railroad entrepreneur. He and his older brother started a shipping business when they were 10 and 12 years old. So they did what Amazon does now. They did intershipping in the city of Tarrytown, and he ended up being a multimillionaire and building a railroad empire and stuff like that. So I've got some pictures of OHP. And then I've got a bunch of pictures of politicians that I've been with, Bill Clinton, Richard Nixon, Arnold Schwarzenegger, a whole bunch of things like that. So I think you get more than just prose.
You get the depth, right? You get the full picture. I like that. Well, thank you so much for sharing here everything today, Jonathan. I do have a couple links in the description below. I have the link to your book on Amazon. I have your author website, your book trailer, and your Facebook. And I'm also going to add in your Substack as well, because I think that that's such a great resource for people to connect with you. And anything else you would want us to hear today, to leave us with any thoughts as we close here?
Sure. To those who are listening, first, thanks for listening. If you buy the book, I'm going to make the same request that I made to my friend John Schwartzberg. Read the book. Please write a review, because that helps sell the book. It's on sale right now. The ebook edition is on sale in Amazon and all the other providers that do it. You can get it on Apple Books and anywhere you can buy books. And then seriously, if you have comments or suggestions, I think this is an interactive process. So shoot me a note. That's why the website is there. And I've gotten some really good commentary. I've gotten some people questioning ideas that I have. And I think that's been a good process for me. And I hope it'll be for my readers.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you again, Jonathan, for joining us. This is the My Life Now podcast. And I hope to have you back on eventually to talk a little bit deeper about this book and other projects that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Dallas. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening and supporting another episode of My Life Now.
Please remember to subscribe to our podcast show and share it with a friend.
Together, we can keep the message of these books alive.
Until we turn the next page together, stay classy.